Hello, this is Angela with Progress Permaculture. I wanted to make a quick follow-up to answer your questions about my recent video about how I built 8 to 12 inches of soil using wood chip mulch. So I got a number of questions, both on YouTube and in DMs. I would encourage you, if you ask questions on YouTube, I don't always have time to answer them, but I do read all of them and I try to get back to as many folks as I can. So please know if you're dropping a question there, I will see it and I will try to get to it. If I don't address it directly in the video comments themselves, I will try to make sure that information is included in a later video. So one of the questions that I was asked was, how deeply do I mulch with wood chips? Now, that is an excellent question, and it actually varies. So in the garden paths, I have wood chips sometimes as deep as 2 feet. So I have dug in the backyard these kind of kidney bean shaped beds with swales built in. And there I have dug the paths down and built the beds up so that there's almost 2 feet of really spongy, thick wood chips that serve as a literal sponge for soaking up water and helping in the dry months redistribute it to my annual veggie beds. It is part of my swale system, but in most of the garden I use anywhere between 2 and 4 inches of wood chips. Now, those are wood chips that are not yet broken down. So when they start to break down and get really black and loamy and lovely, then I put more wood chips on top. So that kind of black loamy material is now compost. It's now literally made humus out of wood chips, and so that is bioavailable to the plants, and so then I want to add more mulch on top. So for areas of my garden where I am concerned about herbaceous perennials potentially getting smothered by a thick layer of mulch, I put 2 inches of wood chips. I don't want to smother things like my Turkish rocket or some of my more delicate kind of cottage garden perennials. I have a few parts of my garden where I know that those perennials are tough as nails and will come up even through the thickest mulch, like peonies. I could put like 6 inches of mulch on them and they would be fine. So for those areas where I have herbaceous perennials I'm concerned may get killed if I put too much mulch, I use 2 inches. The rest of my garden, it's closer to 4. Definitely around my fruit trees, on any of those beds that are mostly large woody perennials, I'm looking at 4 inches of chips. If you do more than that, you can risk kind of smothering plants and causing some dieback. You also risk having the wood chips themselves push up against the branches of your woody perennials and potentially trapping moisture and encouraging mold and disease transmission that way. So I am careful that when I'm mounding up my wood chips, they're not pushed up against the living material of the plants themselves. It is a mulch. It is a mulch for the ground. It is not a mulch for directly on top of my woody perennials themselves. So another question that I was asked is, how often do I get wood chips delivered? I am very lucky that my street here is the main road along which arborists travel to the dump to dump their wood chips. If I put my name on the chip drop, then they are very likely to stop on their way and say, hey, I'm going to dump these here and avoid the dump fee. It means I've never paid for wood chips. A lot of folks I know tend to pay about $40 a load for wood chips from Chip Drop, but I am in a very lucky location. And so I will get wood chips as often as my front yard has room to dump a load of chips. I'll request one. Typically in a given year, that means I get between 2 and 6 loads of wood chips. I've never done fewer than 2 loads in the past, and they tend to run between 6 and 15 yards each. A lot of the larger loads from Chip Drop are like that 9 to 12 yards, and that's very easy for me to use in my garden because I use it not only on the beds themselves, but also in the paths. I have a concern that in the future, if wood chips are in shorter supply, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do. I'll have to get more ingenious about my paths and maybe think about growing more kind of high foot traffic, tolerable, low-growing perennials. I do have quite a bit of white clover in some of my paths, but it's so rainy here in the winter, nothing works better at controlling the mud than wood chips. Now, I do live in an urban area, and so there is that kind of potential endless supply from tree trimming, both for the electric utility. For some reason in the Pacific Northwest, we don't bury our power lines. When I moved here from the Midwest almost 20 years ago, I thought, gosh, this looks messy and weird. But there aren't like tornadoes out here, so folks don't bury their power lines. And that means that the electric utility is constantly trimming trees that are entangled in the power lines. And so there's pretty much an endless supply of wood chips as a result. Also, folks in Portland are constantly wanting to divide plots and infill with more housing, and that means trees are regularly getting removed. There is also lots of inclement weather here. That means that we're having trees removed due to wind damage. I don't know that that will be changing. Demand for chip drop goes up, but I have not seen the frequency at which I get a load decrease in the last 10 years. So I feel like the supply and the demand are pretty well paired up right now. If things change in the future, I'll need to reassess. So at this point, I would say I get an average of 3 to 4 loads a year, but it has been as little as 2 or as many as 6. It does mean I get like quite a workout. It's quite a lot of work shoveling those chips, and I'm not sure how I'm going to handle that as I get older. So the next question I got was, am I concerned about the contents of the wood chips? Now, on Chip Drop, you can list what species you are willing and not willing to take. I find that arborists rarely follow that list. I may say no conifers, and my chip drop load is like 80% pine needles. So what I found is that eventually everything breaks down and turns into lovely fertility for my garden. So I don't stress. If I get something that's full of like rhododendron or full of like black walnut with juglone in it, I will leave it and let it compost longer. I won't put it around those plants that are sensitive to those hormones. And so it means that sometimes I need to be able to park my wood chips somewhere while they break down. But eventually I can use everything. As I said in an earlier video, one of the few things that really concerns me is bamboo rhizomes. I want to make sure I'm really careful at sifting those out of my chip drop loads. Now, if I have a load that has a lot of coniferous material, folks have asked if I'm concerned about it acidifying my soil. My soil pH is already like 4.5. It's really acidic here because it just rains all the time. And that means that I'm not worried about it, one, but two, using coniferous mulch, it is really acidic when you apply it, but that acidification is temporary. As your wood chips break down, even those kind of resinous, like Western cedar, even those kind of pine chips, the pH will slowly rise until it comes back up to neutral. By the time it is that beautiful black soil, it's no longer acidic. So if you are hoping to acidify your soil by adding coniferous wood chips, it's going to be a temporary change. You want to permanently acidify, you need to add sulfur. But at the same time, don't stress that you are somehow damaging the pH of your garden ecosystem by adding coniferous material. As it breaks down, the pH will rise. So don't worry, it's all going to end up at that like normal kind of pH neutral. And for me, that means that I'm not stressed. I do add lots of pine chips around my blueberries, but I know that that doesn't give them a long-term benefit. So I hope that answers your questions on my recent video about how I built 12 inches of soil using wood chip mulch. If you have more questions, I would love to hear them below. I'm happy to try and find the time to answer them because I have really benefited from my kind of like, experimentation and my live and learn way of gardening. And I hope that I can share some of my successes and failures with y'all so you don't have to repeat my mistakes. And I hope that the things that have worked for me are also a benefit for you. So I'll be back for my permaculture garden soon. Thank you so much for watching, and please check out my PayPal and my Patreon down below. Thanks.